Now, the Inquisition, contrary to belief, it was not unpopular. It was certainly unpopular for the heretics, but it was not unpopular for the general population. It was heresy that was unpopular, and so people didn't like heretics. The Inquisition, after it started in France, it spread to other countries, northern Spain, Germany, Italy, and when there was no Inquisition, it was the civil authorities that handled heresy. So very often it was the civil authorities who took the initiative, and in those cases they were much more brutal and much less meticulous than the Inquisition. Because the Inquisition, it did follow very strict rules of proof of Roman law. So it did not, whereas the civil authorities were much less careful to do that. And civil law was very brutal. I can give you just one example here. In secular criminal law, in the 18th century, all the advances made by the Enlightenment, 18th century England, for stealing a handkerchief that was worth 1 shilling, if the thief was 8 years old or older, it was a death penalty for that. England was executing criminals all the time. So, in other words, just as one example, the criminal courts were very, very severe, and then, so we see these things happening in the Middle Ages, and we're horrified by it. We've come a long way, but it was the mentality of the time. If the Inquisition had been the brutal institution that people painted as, there would have been no Reformation. Luther and the Protestants would have been put down very quickly by the courts. So basically, it was not the institution that people say it was, but there were abuses, and there were people who were executed for rebelling against the faith, and they were seen as traitors. The civil authorities, they saw these people as subverting the right order of things, subverting the political order, undermining the authority of the state, and therefore they were seen as criminals, as traitors. And as I was saying last night, the real problem is that when the church and the state are so close to each other, and the church is able to call upon the power of the state to enforce its own law, that's when you end up with this kind of situation. The Inquisition died down, but not out, in the late 14th century. It revived again with the Protestant Reformation. As you know, probably the most famous victim of the medieval Inquisition was Joan of Arc. And you know her story. She was burned as a heretic and a witch by the Inquisition in northern France in the 15th century. Let's look at the more famous institution here is the Spanish Inquisition. And what happens there? Well, as you know, Spain was conquered by the Muslims in the 8th century, and there was a long process of reconquest. There were a lot of Jews in Spain. There were tens of thousands of Jews in Spain. It was where there was a very large population of Jews. As land was being reconquered, then the Muslims were retreating, but there were small Muslim populations that stayed, but many Jews stayed. They could live with the Muslims, they could live with the Christians, and so the Catholic monarchs were inheriting large populations of Jews. In the year 1378, there was a very widespread program, a persecution against the Jews in Spain, because they had managed they controlled the finances, they controlled a lot of the business there. People were a lot of jealousy, and so the Christians rose up, and there was a big program. Many of the Jews were killed, but many more converted. It was basically they were scared of what was happening, so many of them converted to Christianity. Some of them sincerely, many of them not. So many of them continued to practice Judaism on the sly, in secret, and to be Catholics in public. So they continued to practice their faith in secret. And they, as Catholics, they dominated over a few years. They dominated finance, tax collection, and medicine. Now, in other countries, the Jews have been expelled, and they've been expelled from England in the year 1290, from France in the year 1394, and again, what we call the old Christians in Spain, they were very jealous of this, that this new group of Jews who had become Christians, but who still sort of hung out with each other. There was a lot of jealousy there, because they were controlling the economy of the country. And so again, you begin in the 15th century, you begin to have riots and the killing of Jews and of converted Jews. And of course, that was a very bad situation, because many of the people who were attacked were sincerely Catholics. They were not closet Jews. So in the year 1478, Ferdinand and Isabel, the Catholic monarchs of Spain, they want to end the massacres, and so they ask the Pope for a bull which will allow them to make inquisition into what's happening, basically, and to see whether the Jews who have converted are really Jews, or whether they are or not, or whether they are secretly practicing their faith, whether they're really Catholics or not. So that was the reason for calling the Spanish Inquisition. The medieval Inquisition had no authority over non-Catholics, by the way. Right? There was if there were Jews or Muslims in Spain during the Middle Ages, the Inquisition didn't bother with them. It was never an attempt to baptize people by force or to convert people by force. It was people who would baptize Catholics who were then subverting the faith. Right? So the same thing here. The Spanish Inquisition, what it did was to look into, its aim was to look into those Catholics from Jewish families who had converted some centuries or 100 years earlier, and to see whether they were truly Catholics or whether they were really sort of closet Jews who were practicing their faith in secret. And this was an attempt to unify the country, basically. It was a political move by Ferdinand and Isabel, because there was a lot of dissent here. What they did was to put the Inquisition in the hands of converted Jews. So though they were people, the inquisitors were people who were originally from Jewish families who had converted, who they knew were sincere. They were ecclesiastics, and so they put it into their hands, so they would have a better handle on how to do this. The aim was reconciliation and assimilation, not persuasion or coercion. The aim was to try to assimilate people properly, and so if those people were practicing their Jewish faith in secret, it was to try and get them to stop doing that. So the Inquisition was trying people who were being secretly Jewish, and those who were found guilty and who did not repent, again, were executed. So again, the numbers there are exaggerated, but there was the very first period of the Spanish Inquisition was like out of control, if you want. There were 2,000 people who were put to death during that 52-year period, and between 1,500 and 2,000 people. And there was a cry from the Spaniards about this, and the Pope intervened, and from that moment on, he made the rules more strict, and he forced Ferdinand and Isabel well, they weren't on the throne, Charles V by that time, to reform the Inquisition and put it in the hands of people who would be more learned, if you want, and less passionate. So, from the year 1530, when the Inquisition was reformed in Spain, until its abolition in the 19th century, it carried on until the 19th century, we know exactly what happened. There were 775 people executed. That included Spain and Portugal and Latin America. So about 2 per year for those 300 years.